The dust cloud rose behind her wagon like the funeral shroud of her old life, and Zelda Nolan knew she could never go back to Virginia City, Nevada, not after what Marcus Thornhill had done to her name. The summer of 1877 had started with promise. She had been 22 years old, working as a seamstress in the growing mining town, making enough to send money back to her ailing mother in Missouri. Marcus Thornhill had come into her shop on a Tuesday afternoon, all polish and charm, his suit pressed and his hair slicked back with pomade. He had courted her for 3 months, bringing flowers every Sunday, taking her to church socials, speaking of marriage and the fine house he would build for them once his mining investment paid off. She had believed every word, had let herself imagine a future with children and a garden and Sunday dinners around a long oak table. But when she had refused his proposal, something had shifted in his eyes. She had said no gently, explaining that she had realized she did not love him, not in the way a wife should love her husband. She had expected disappointment, perhaps some wounded pride. What she had not expected was the systematic destruction of her reputation that followed. Marcus Thornhill was a man with connections and a silver tongue. Within a week, whispers started circulating through Virginia City. She was a woman of loose morals, they said. She had taken money from men for favors. She had stolen from the shop where she worked. None of it was true, but truth mattered little when a respected businessman spoke with conviction and careful insinuation. Her customers stopped coming. Her landlady asked her to leave. The shopkeeper who had employed her for 2 years let her go without severance. Zelda had tried to defend herself, but her words fell on deaf ears. Marcus had been clever, never making direct accusations, only expressing concern for her welfare in tones dripping with false sympathy. When she confronted him outside the assayer's office, he had smiled that cold smile and said, "You should have thought about the consequences before embarrassing me, Miss Nolan." She had packed what remained of her possessions and moved to Carson City, hoping for a fresh start. But Marcus had friends there too. Within 2 weeks, the same whispers began. She moved to Reno, then to Elko. Each time the pattern repeated. Somehow, Marcus Thornhill's poison reached ahead of her, his letters arriving before she did, his lies taking root before she could even introduce herself. Now, 6 months after that terrible refusal, Zelda found herself traveling east across the Nevada territory with what little money she had left, and a wagon pulled by 2 tired horses. She had heard that Kansas offered opportunities for those willing to work hard. Fort Leavenworth and the town growing around it needed seamstresses, laundresses, cooks. Perhaps Marcus Thornhill's reach did not extend that far. Perhaps she could finally outrun the lies. The journey was brutal. September had arrived with cooler nights, but the days still baked under the relentless sun. Zelda rationed her water carefully, following the emigrant trails that thousands had taken before her. She traveled with a small wagon train for safety, keeping to herself, avoiding questions about her past. The other travelers were kind enough, but she had learned not to trust easily. They crossed into Utah territory, then Colorado, and finally into Kansas. The landscape changed from desert to grassland, endless rolling plains that stretched to the horizon. Zelda felt something loosen in her chest as the miles accumulated. Surely no one here would know Marcus Thornhill's name. Surely his lies could not reach this far. The wagon train disbanded in Topeka, families splitting off to their various destinations. Zelda continued north toward Fort Leavenworth, arriving on a crisp October afternoon when the leaves on the cottonwood trees glowed golden in the slanting light. The town of Leavenworth, Kansas, had grown substantially around the military fort, its wooden buildings stretching along the Missouri River. She could see steamboats docked at the levee, loading and unloading goods. The streets bustled with soldiers, merchants, railroad workers, and settlers heading further west. Zelda found a respectable boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher, a stout woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. The room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the main street. Zelda paid for 2 weeks in advance and spent the first few days simply recovering from the journey, washing her clothes, mending the tears in her traveling dress, and letting her body rest. On her 4th day in Leavenworth, she began looking for work. The town was thriving, full of opportunity as the railroad expanded and settlers poured through on their way west. She visited dress shops, laundries, even the hotel restaurant. Each proprietor listened politely to her qualifications, examined the samples of her needlework, and promised to consider her application. She was returning to the boarding house that evening, feeling cautiously optimistic, when she overheard 2 women talking outside the general store. "Did you hear about that Nolan woman?" one said, her voice carrying in the twilight air. Zelda's blood turned to ice. "The one staying at Fletcher's place. What about her?" Margaret Thompson received a letter from her cousin in Nevada. Apparently, this Nolan woman was run out of several towns for immoral behavior. Theft too, I heard. Margaret's telling everyone to be careful. Zelda stood frozen on the boardwalk, her packages clutched to her chest. It was impossible. She had traveled over 1,000 miles. How could Marcus's lies have followed her here? The answer came 3 days later when Mrs. Fletcher knocked on her door, her expression uncomfortable. "Miss Nolan, I need to speak with you about something troubling." Zelda invited her in, her heart sinking. "I have received some concerning correspondence," Mrs. Fletcher said, pulling a letter from her apron pocket. "From a Mr. Marcus Thornhill of Virginia City, Nevada. He claims to be a concerned citizen warning respectable establishments about a woman of questionable character who may be traveling under your name." "It is all lies," Zelda said, her voice shaking. "He is a man I refuse to marry, and he has dedicated himself to destroying my reputation in revenge." Mrs. Fletcher's expression was sympathetic but firm. "I want to believe you, Miss Nolan. You seem like a decent young woman, but I have a business to run and a reputation to maintain. I cannot afford to house someone who brings scandal to my door. Please," Zelda said. "I have nowhere else to go." "Everything he says is false. I can provide references from my employer in Virginia City before Marcus started his campaign." "I am sorry," Mrs. Fletcher said, and she did sound genuinely regretful. "But I need you to leave by the end of the week. I will not tell others where you have gone, but I cannot keep you here." Zelda spent that night crying into her pillow, feeling the walls closing in. She had no money for another journey. She had no energy left to run. Marcus Thornhill's reach was impossibly long, his vindictiveness without limit. How did he even know she had come to Leavenworth? Did he have people tracking her movements, reporting back to him? The next morning, she ventured out to make one last attempt at finding employment. If she could secure work and lodging together, perhaps at her ranch or farm outside town, she might escape the gossip. She walked to the edge of Leavenworth where the businesses gave way to scattered homesteads and cattle ranches. That was where she met Samuel Pierce. She had been walking along a fence line, reading a notice posted about ranch work, when a voice behind her said, "That job's already been filled, I'm afraid." Zelda turned to find a man leading a horse toward the gate. He was tall and lean, built like someone who spent his life outdoors. His face was tanned and weathered, probably in his late 20s, with eyes the color of a summer sky and dark brown hair that needed cutting. He wore work clothes, dusty from a day's labor, and a hat pushed back on his head. There was an easy confidence in his posture, but his expression was kind. "Oh," Zelda said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Thank you for telling me." He studied her for a moment, taking in her travel-worn dress and the defeat in her eyes. "You new to Leavenworth?" "Yes, I arrived last week from Nevada. Long journey." He opened the gate and led his horse through. "I'm Samuel Pierce. My father owns the ranch adjoining this property." "Zelda Nolan," she said, though the name felt like a curse now. "You looking for work, Miss Nolan?" "Yes, anything. I can sew, cook, launder, keep accounts. I am a hard worker and I do not complain." Samuel tied his horse to the fence post and leaned against the rail, considering her. "We might have something at our place. My mother's been needing help with the house and the cooking since she took sick last spring. She is recovering now, but she cannot manage everything alone anymore. It would be room and board plus wages. Not much, but honest work." Hope fluttered in Zelda's chest, fragile as a moth's wing. "I would be very interested in that position. Come by tomorrow morning and I will introduce you to my parents." The Pierce Ranch, about 3 miles north on the river road. You cannot miss it. "Thank you," Zelda said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Samuel smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger. "Everyone deserves a chance, Miss Nolan. See you tomorrow." That night, Zelda barely slept, alternating between hope and dread. What if Marcus's letters had already reached the Pierce family? What if this was just another door closing in her face? But she had no other options. She rose before dawn, put on her best dress, and walked the 3 miles to the Pierce Ranch as the sun rose over the Missouri River. The ranch was substantial, with a well-built house, several barns, and extensive corrals where cattle and horses grazed. Zelda could see the prosperity in the maintained fences and the sturdy outbuildings. Samuel met her at the front porch, looking freshly washed and considerably more presentable than the day before. "Right on time," he said approvingly. "Come meet my folks." Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, furnished simply but comfortably. Samuel's mother, Margaret Pierce, was a thin woman in her 50s with silver threading through her dark hair and the same kind eyes as her son. Samuel's father, George Pierce, was a gruff, broad-shouldered man who looked like he could wrestle a bull and win. They sat at the kitchen table, assessing Zelda with the practiced eye of people who had hired many hands over the years. "Samuel says you are looking for work," Margaret said. "Tell us about yourself, dear." Zelda had prepared for this, but her voice still trembled as she spoke. "I am 22 years old, from Missouri originally. I worked as a seamstress in Nevada for several years. I am a good cook and I keep a clean house. I am honest and reliable." "Why did you leave Nevada?" George asked bluntly. This was the moment. Zelda took a breath and decided on honesty. She was tired of running, tired of half-truths. "I rejected a marriage proposal from a man named Marcus Thornhill. He was angry and he began spreading lies about me. He ruined my reputation in Virginia City, and when I moved to other towns, he followed with letters and gossip. I came to Kansas hoping his reach would not extend this far, but I fear it already has. I am telling you this because you deserve to know the truth, not the lies. I have never stolen anything. I have never acted immorally, but I understand if you do not wish to employ me." The silence stretched. Samuel was watching his parents, his expression unreadable. Finally, Margaret spoke. "That is a terrible thing for a man to do," she said quietly. "I have heard of such vindictiveness, though I have never witnessed it so thoroughly. George, what do you think?" George Pierce leaned back in his chair, his weathered face thoughtful. "I think if a man has to destroy a woman's reputation because she said no to him, he was not worth marrying in the first place. I also think Miss Nolan could have lied to us, but she chose honesty instead. That speaks to character." We have not received any letters about you, Margaret added. And even if we do, I am inclined to judge you by your actions here, not by gossip from a spurned suitor. If you are willing to work hard and treat us fairly, we will do the same for you. Relief flooded through Zelda so intensely she felt dizzy. Thank you. Thank you so much. You will not regret this. We will see, George said, but his tone was not unkind. Samuel will show you to the hired hand's cottage. It is small but private. You can start tomorrow. The cottage was indeed small, just one room with a bed, a stove, a table, and a chair, but it was clean and sturdy with a good roof and a door that locked. Zelda stood in the doorway, looking at this tiny space, and felt something she had not felt in months: safety. Samuel lingered at the door. I hope it suits. We had a cook living here before, but he moved on last spring. It is perfect, Zelda said. He nodded, then hesitated. Miss Nolan, I want you to know that what my father said is true. We will judge you by who you are here, not by what some vengeful man says about you. Everyone deserves a fresh start. Zelda met his eyes, seeing genuine kindness there, and felt something shift in her chest. Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. Samuel considered the question. I suppose because I have seen what lies can do. A few years back, a ranch hand was accused of theft. Turned out the foreman had been stealing and blamed it on the hand to cover his own tracks. The hand nearly got lynched before the truth came out. Since then, I have been careful about believing accusations without proof. Words are easy. Truth takes more effort. That is a rare perspective, Zelda said softly, maybe, but it is the right one. He tipped his hat. Welcome to Pierce Ranch, Miss Nolan. I think you will do well here. Zelda moved her few belongings from Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house the next day, enduring the woman's tight-lipped disapproval and the whispers of the other boarders. She did not care anymore. She had a place where she was wanted, where people were willing to judge her fairly. The work at the ranch was demanding but satisfying. Margaret Pierce was a patient teacher, showing Zelda how she liked the house kept, how to cook for a working ranch with hired hands who ate like locusts, how to manage the chickens and the kitchen garden. Zelda threw herself into the work with determination, rising before dawn to start breakfast, spending her days cooking, cleaning, mending, and helping Margaret with whatever needed doing. The Pierce family was good to work for. George was gruff but fair, Margaret was warm and maternal, and Samuel was unfailingly kind. He worked from sunrise to sunset managing the cattle, training horses, mending fences, and doing the 1,000 tasks that kept a ranch running. He often ate his meals quickly, standing at the kitchen counter, too busy to sit down. But he always thanked Zelda for the food, always asked how her day had been. Weeks passed. October gave way to November, and the Kansas air turned crisp and cold. Zelda began to relax, to believe that maybe, finally, she had found a place where Marcus Thornhill's poison could not reach. She became friends with Margaret, listening to stories about Samuel's childhood, about the early days of the ranch when they had lived in a sod house and fought to survive. She learned that Samuel had a younger sister who had married a farmer in Iowa, and that he had once been engaged to a woman who had left him for a wealthier man in St. Louis. It broke his heart, Margaret confided one afternoon as they kneaded bread dough together. He loved her truly. But she wanted things he could not provide, at least not yet. He has been cautious with his heart ever since. Zelda understood that feeling all too well. She saw Samuel differently after that, noticing the sadness that sometimes flickered in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. She noticed how gentle he was with the animals, how patient with the younger ranch hands, how he never raised his voice in anger even when frustrated. She noticed the way he smiled at her across the dinner table, the way he always made sure to compliment her cooking, the way he sometimes lingered in the kitchen after meals to help wash dishes even though it was not his job. She told herself not to read anything into it. She was an employee. He was being kind. That was all, but her heart did not listen to reason. It was early December when the first real trouble arrived. Zelda had been at the ranch for 2 months, and she had started to believe she was truly safe. Then one afternoon, Samuel came into the kitchen with a letter in his hand and anger in his eyes. "This came in the mail today," he said without preamble. "Addressed to my father." Zelda's stomach dropped. "Let me guess. Marcus Thornhill. How did you know?" "Because he has been sending these letters everywhere I go." "What does it say?" Samuel's jaw tightened. "It says you are a thief and a woman of immoral character. It says you have left a trail of debt and scandal across Nevada. It says we should dismiss you immediately before you robs us blind or worse." Zelda sank into a chair, feeling the familiar despair wash over her. "What did your father say?" "He said the letter writer can go to hell." Samuel pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "Zelda, we have had you here for 2 months. You have been nothing but hardworking, honest, and kind. You have helped my mother regain her strength. You have made this house a warmer place. Do you really think we would believe the word of some stranger over what we have seen with our own eyes?" "But the gossip," Zelda said. "It will start again. It always does. People will talk and they will stop doing business with your family because of me." "Let them talk," Samuel said fiercely. "I do not care about gossip. I care about what is true. You say that now, but when it affects your livelihood, when people start avoiding you because you employ me, you will change your mind. Everyone does." Samuel reached across the table and took her hand. The touch sent electricity through her arm. "Zelda, listen to me. His words do not reach here. Not in any way that matters. This ranch has been in my family for 20 years. We have a reputation built on 2 decades of fair dealing and hard work. No stranger's lies are going to change that. You do not know Marcus Thornhill. He is relentless. I do not need to know him. I know you." Samuel's grip on her hand tightened. "And I know something else. I know that any man who would try to destroy a woman for saying no to him is a coward and a bully. I know that his opinion is worthless. And I know that you are under our protection now, and that means something." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care?" Samuel looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes intense. "Because it is the right thing to do, and because I have come to care about you, Zelda, more than I probably should, given that you work for my family. But I cannot help it. I see your strength, your resilience, your kindness despite everything you have been through. I see you and I want to protect you from men like Thornhill." "Samuel," she whispered, her heart pounding. He released her hand and stood abruptly. "I am sorry. That was inappropriate. You are an employee and I should not have said any of that." "No," Zelda said, standing as well. "Do not apologize. I am glad you said it, because I have been feeling the same way and telling myself I should not." Samuel turned back to her, hope dawning on his face. "You have. How could I not? You saved me when I had nowhere to go. You have been nothing but kind and decent. You see me as a person, not as the lies Marcus spread. You make me feel safe for the first time in months." They stood there in the kitchen, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Samuel closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "Zelda Nolan, I know the timing is not ideal, and I know you have been through hell because of one man's proposal. But I need to tell you that I am falling in love with you. I have been since the day I met you on that road. If you do not feel the same, I understand, but I cannot keep it to myself anymore." Zelda reached up and covered his hands with hers. "I am falling in love with you too. I tried not to. I told myself it was too soon, too complicated. But my heart does not listen." Samuel kissed her then, gentle and careful as though she were something precious. Zelda melted into it, feeling the tension she had carried for months finally begin to dissolve. This was what a kiss should feel like. Not the calculated charm of Marcus Thornhill, but genuine affection and respect. When they pulled apart, Samuel was grinning. "My mother is going to be insufferable about this. She has been dropping hints for weeks that I should court you properly." "Your mother knew." "My mother knows everything." "It is a terrifying ability." Zelda laughed, the sound startling her. When was the last time she had laughed freely? "What do we do now?" "Now we tell my parents, and we face whatever comes together, starting with burning that damn letter from Thornhill." They did burn it, feeding it to the kitchen stove and watching the lies turn to ash. When George and Margaret came in for dinner, Samuel announced that he was courting Zelda, and Margaret just smiled knowingly and said she was about time. George grunted his approval and asked if this meant the biscuits would keep getting better. Life at the ranch took on a new sweetness. Samuel courted Zelda properly despite living on the same property, riding into town to bring her small gifts, taking her on walks along the river on Sunday afternoons, teaching her to ride horses. Zelda had never been so happy. For the first time in her life, she felt truly cherished. But Marcus Thornhill was not finished with her. More letters arrived throughout December, not just to the Pierce family but to their neighbors, to businesses in town, to the church. Marcus's campaign was methodical and vicious. He wrote about Zelda's supposed crimes in lurid detail, painting her as a con artist and worse. Some people ignored the letters. Others began to whisper. Zelda felt the familiar anxiety creeping back in. She saw the looks when she went to town with Margaret, heard the conversations that stopped when she entered the general store. Samuel's determination that his words did not reach here was noble, but gossip had a way of poisoning everything it touched. It came to a head just before Christmas. Samuel had driven Zelda into Leavenworth to purchase fabric for new curtains Margaret wanted. They were standing in the dry goods store when a woman Zelda had never met approached them. "Excuse me," the woman said coldly. "Are you Zelda Nolan?" "I am," Zelda said, her spine straightening. "I am Mrs. Thompson. I have received correspondence from Nevada warning respectable people about you. I think it is shameful that the Pierce family would harbor someone of your character, and I have told everyone who will listen to avoid doing business with them until they come to their senses." Samuel stepped forward, his voice hard. "Mrs. Thompson, I suggest you stop spreading lies before I speak to your husband about slander." "Slander? I am simply repeating what I have been told by a concerned citizen." "You are repeating malicious gossip from a man who was rejected and is seeking revenge. If you had any decency, you would judge Miss Nolan by her actions, not by the lies of a stranger." "I know what I know," Mrs. Thompson said primly. "You know nothing," Samuel said. "And your willingness to destroy someone's reputation based on anonymous letters says more about your character than it does about hers. Now, if you will excuse us." He took Zelda's arm and led her out of the store. She was shaking with anger and humiliation. "This is what I was afraid of. She is going to convince people to stop doing business with your family. You will lose money because of me." "I do not care about Mrs. Thompson's opinion," Samuel said. "She is a busybody with nothing better to do than gossip. Anyone who actually knows my family will not listen to her." But over the next week, it became clear that Mrs. Thompson had been effective. 2 families canceled orders for cattle. The blacksmith mentioned that he had heard troubling things. Even the pastor at the church gave Zelda a cold look when she attended Sunday service with the Pierce family. Zelda could not stand it anymore. On a cold evening 3 days before Christmas, she told Samuel she was leaving. "What? No, Zelda, you cannot let him win." They were standing in the barn where Samuel had been checking on a pregnant mare. Zelda had brought him coffee, and now she set the cup down on a hay bale with shaking hands. I am not letting him win. I am protecting your family. Samuel, you are losing business because of me. How can I stay and watch that happen? Where would you even go? He will just follow you again. I do not know. Maybe I will go somewhere so remote he cannot find me. Maybe I will change my name, but I cannot stay here and ruin everything you have built. Samuel grabbed her shoulders, his eyes blazing. You are not ruining anything. A few small-minded people are choosing gossip over truth. That is on them, not you. Zelda, I love you. Do you understand? I love you, and I will not let you leave because of Marcus Thornhill's poison. You love me, Zelda whispered. Yes, I was trying to wait to say it properly, maybe at Christmas, but yes, I love you. I have never been more sure of anything, and I know you love me too. Do not let fear drive you away. Zelda felt tears streaming down her face. I do love you. That is why I have to go. I cannot be the reason your family suffers. And I cannot be the man who lets the woman he loves run away into the unknown. There has to be another solution. What solution? Marcus will never stop. He has made it his mission to destroy me. Samuel released her and began pacing, his mind clearly working. What if we went to the source? What if we traveled to Virginia City and confronted him directly? That is madness. He is powerful there, he has friends and influence. But he is also a coward. Bullies usually are. What if we brought proof of his lies? What if we exposed him for what he is? Who would believe us? The truth has a way of coming out if you shine enough light on it. We could talk to your former employer, to people who knew you before Marcus started his campaign. We could gather statements, show the pattern of his behavior. We could threaten legal action. Zelda shook her head. It would be my word against his, and the journey to Nevada in winter would be dangerous and expensive. I have money saved, and I would travel through hell if it meant stopping this. Samuel took her hands. Zelda, I do not want to spend my life watching you suffer under the weight of lies. I want to clear your name. I want you to be able to walk into town with your head held high. I want to marry you without this shadow hanging over us. Marry me. Zelda's voice was barely a whisper. Samuel dropped to one knee right there in the barn, still holding her hands. I was going to do this properly, with a ring and flowers, but I cannot wait. Zelda Nolan, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are loved and valued, and that nothing Marcus Thornhill says matters? Will you trust me enough to fight this battle together? Zelda looked down at this good man kneeling in the hay, offering her everything she had thought she would never have, and felt something break open in her chest. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you, but I do not want you to give up your life to fight my battles. They are our battles now, Samuel said, standing and pulling her into his arms. That is what marriage means. We face everything together. They told his parents that night. Margaret cried with joy and immediately began planning a wedding. George clapped Samuel on the shoulder and told Zelda she was getting a good man. And when Zelda explained her fears about the gossip and Samuel's plan to confront Marcus in Nevada, George surprised her. I think that is exactly what needs to happen, he said. I have had enough of this Thornhill fellow's interference. Samuel, take Zelda to Nevada after Christmas. Clear this up once and for all. Your mother and I can manage the ranch for a few weeks, and when you come back we will have a proper wedding. Margaret nodded. I agree. This has gone on long enough. Zelda deserves to start her new life without this hanging over her head. So the plan was set. They would celebrate Christmas at the ranch. Then Samuel and Zelda would travel to Virginia City to confront Marcus Thornhill and gather evidence of his campaign of lies. It was risky and uncertain, but for the first time, Zelda felt like she was not running away. She was fighting back. Christmas at the Pierce Ranch was the happiest Zelda had known since childhood. Margaret cooked an enormous feast. George brought in a cedar tree that filled the house with its sharp, clean scent. Samuel carved Zelda a small wooden horse, perfect in every detail. Zelda had sewn him a warm coat from fabric she had purchased with her own wages, lined with fleece and stitched with care. But the best gift was the simple fact of being together, being loved, being safe. They sat by the fire on Christmas Eve, Samuel's arm around Zelda's shoulders, and she felt the future opening up before her like a door she had thought was locked forever. They left for Nevada on December 28th, as soon as the weather cleared enough for safe travel. The journey would take several weeks each way, even traveling as quickly as possible by train where the rails reached and by stagecoach where they did not. Samuel was prepared, having studied the routes and arranged their travel carefully. Zelda felt her anxiety growing as they traveled west, crossing back over the territory she had fled months earlier. What if confronting Marcus made things worse? What if he laughed in their faces? What if he had them arrested on false charges? Samuel seemed to sense her fears, holding her hand during the long stagecoach rides, reassuring her with his steady presence. They reached Virginia City in late January 1878, arriving in the early afternoon when the town was bustling with activity. The mining boom was still going strong and the streets were crowded with wagons and people. Zelda had not been back since May, and seeing the familiar buildings brought a flood of painful memories. "Where do we start?" Samuel asked. "With Mrs. Patterson. She owned the dress shop where I worked. If anyone knows the truth about what happened, she does." They found Mrs. Patterson's shop on the main street, its window display showing the same kind of elegant dresses Zelda had once sewn. When they entered, the bell above the door chimed, and Mrs. Patterson emerged from the back room. She was a thin, elegant woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and skilled hands. When she saw Zelda, her expression shifted from professional welcome to genuine warmth. "Zelda Nolan. My goodness, child, where have you been?" "Kansas, madam. I am sorry I left so suddenly." "I do not blame you for leaving. That business with Marcus Thornhill was disgraceful." Mrs. Patterson looked at Samuel with interest. "And who is this?" "This is Samuel Pierce, my fiancé. We came back to Virginia City to address the lies Mr. Thornhill has been spreading about me." Mrs. Patterson's expression hardened. "About time someone did. That man has been poison to this town. What can I do to help?" Over the next hour, Mrs. Patterson told them everything. How Marcus had come to her shop after Zelda left, trying to convince her that Zelda had been stealing. How she had refused to believe it because her inventory was perfect and Zelda had always been honest. How Marcus had then gone to other businesses, spreading rumors, writing letters, systematically destroying Zelda's reputation. How Mrs. Patterson had tried to defend Zelda, but found herself drowned out by Marcus's wealth and influence. "I still have the letters he sent to other shops," Mrs. Patterson said. "I collected them as evidence, hoping someone would eventually hold him accountable. He was very careful, never making direct accusations, always implying and insinuating. But the pattern is clear." "Would you be willing to make a written statement?" Samuel asked. "Absolutely. And I know others who would too. Not everyone believed Marcus's lies. The problem was that those of us who knew better were afraid to speak up against a man with his connections." They spent the next 3 days in Virginia City, gathering evidence. They spoke to Zelda's former landlady, who admitted she had evicted Zelda only because Marcus had threatened to make trouble for her business. They spoke to other shopkeepers who had received Marcus's letters. They even found a clerk at the telegraph office who had processed dozens of telegrams from Marcus to towns across Nevada and into Kansas, all warning about Zelda. The pattern was undeniable. Marcus Thornhill had conducted a deliberate, systematic campaign of character assassination, all because Zelda had refused to marry him. Armed with written statements and copies of letters, Samuel and Zelda went to confront Marcus. He had an office in one of the larger buildings near the mine headquarters, a place that spoke of wealth and influence. When they walked in, the secretary tried to turn them away, but Samuel was insistent. "Tell Mr. Thornhill that Zelda Nolan is here to speak with him. And tell him that if he refuses, we will take our evidence to the sheriff and the newspaper." The secretary's eyes widened, and she hurried into the back office. A moment later, Marcus Thornhill emerged. He looked exactly as Zelda remembered. Handsome in a polished way, his suit expensive, his hair perfectly styled. But now she could see the coldness in his eyes, the cruel set of his mouth. How had she ever thought she could love this man? "Zelda," Marcus said, his tone dripping with false surprise. "What a shock to see you here. I had heard you were living in Kansas, and who is this? Another victim of your schemes." "This is my fiancé, Samuel Pierce," Zelda said, her voice steady. "And we are here to tell you that your campaign against me stops now." Marcus laughed. "I do not know what you are talking about. I have simply been warning people about your true character. It is my civic duty." Samuel stepped forward, his presence commanding. "We have evidence of your lies, Thornhill. Dozens of letters, telegrams, statements from people you manipulated. We have proof that you started this campaign immediately after Zelda refused your proposal. It is harassment, slander, and possibly criminal." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Marcus's eyes. "You cannot prove anything." "We can prove everything," Samuel said. "And we will, unless you agree to our terms." "What terms?" "You will write letters of retraction to every person and business you contacted with lies about Zelda. You will admit that your accusations were false and motivated by personal spite. You will do this immediately, and you will never speak Zelda's name again. In exchange, we will not take this evidence to the authorities or publish it in the newspapers." Marcus's face flushed red. "You are blackmailing me." "We are giving you a choice," Zelda said. "Take responsibility for your actions and stop hurting me or face the consequences. Those are your options." Marcus glared at them both, his hands clenching into fists. For a moment, Zelda thought he might refuse, might try to brazen it out. But then something changed in his expression. Perhaps he saw the steel in Samuel's eyes, or perhaps he realized that his carefully constructed reputation was at risk. Either way, he deflated. "Fine," he said bitterly. "I will write your damn letters, but you are making a mistake crossing me." "No," Samuel said quietly. "The mistake was yours when you decided to destroy an innocent woman because she wounded your pride. Sign the letters, Thornhill. We will wait." They stood there in his office while Marcus drafted letter after letter, each one admitting that his accusations against Zelda Nolan had been false and motivated by personal anger. He wrote to businesses in Virginia City, Carson City, Reno, Elko, and Leavenworth. He wrote to the boarding houses, the churches, the shops. His hand shook with fury as he signed each one, but he signed them. Samuel collected the letters, checking each one carefully. "We will be posting these ourselves to ensure they are actually sent. And Thornhill, if we hear even a whisper of you speaking about Zelda again, we will publish everything. Do you understand?" Marcus did not answer, just stared at them with hatred in his eyes. They left his office and went straight to the post office, mailing every letter with their own money to ensure delivery. Then they went to the local newspaper and provided an edited version of the story, showing the evidence of Marcus's harassment without revealing all the details. The editor, who had known Zelda when she worked in Virginia City, was outraged and promised to run a story about false accusations and the importance of verifying claims before repeating them. By the time they left Virginia City 2 days later, Zelda felt as though a weight had been lifted from her chest. Marcus Thornhill had been exposed, his lies documented and refuted. The letters of retraction were on their way to everyone he had poisoned against her. It was not perfect justice, but it was something. It was enough. The journey back to Kansas felt different. Zelda no longer felt like she was running away. She was going home. They arrived at the Pierce Ranch in mid-February to find that the retraction letters had already started arriving in Leavenworth. Mrs. Thompson, the woman who had been most vocal about the gossip, had received one and had been forced to admit she had been wrong. Other businesses had received them as well. The whispers about Zelda began to change from accusation to sympathy. Margaret Pierce had been busy in their absence, planning a wedding. She had made a dress from beautiful cream-colored silk, had arranged for the church, had invited half the county. When Zelda protested that it was too much, Margaret just smiled and said that after everything Zelda had been through, she deserved a day of pure celebration. The wedding took place on a mild day in early March, with the first hints of spring appearing in the greening grass and budding trees. Zelda wore the dress Margaret had made, feeling like a princess in its elegant simplicity. Samuel wore a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes bright with happiness. They were married in the small church in Leavenworth, surrounded by the Pierce family, ranch hands, and townsfolk who had come to wish them well. Even Mrs. Thompson attended, sheepishly offering her apologies and congratulations. The words were spoken, the vows exchanged, and when Samuel kissed his bride, Zelda felt the last shadows of Marcus Thornhill's poison dissolve in the light of this new beginning. They held the reception at the ranch, with tables set up outside and food enough to feed a small army. There was music and dancing and laughter. George Pierce gave a toast welcoming Zelda officially into the family. Margaret cried happy tears. Samuel held Zelda close as they danced under the stars and whispered in her ear, "I told you his words did not reach here." "You were right," Zelda whispered back. "They reached here, but they did not matter, not in the end, because truth is stronger than lies, and love is stronger than hate." They spent their wedding night in the cottage, which Margaret had filled with flowers and candles. Samuel was gentle and patient, making love to his wife with reverence and joy. Zelda felt cherished in a way she had never imagined possible, held safe in the arms of a man who had fought for her when she had no strength left to fight for herself. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm after that. Zelda continued to help Margaret with the house, but now as a daughter rather than an employee. She and Samuel shared the cottage, making it a true home with curtains she sewed and furniture he built. They worked side by side during the day and held each other at night, building a partnership based on trust and respect and deep, abiding love. The ranch prospered. The families who had briefly stopped doing business with the Pierces came back, some apologizing, others simply resuming their orders without comment. Zelda became known in Leavenworth not as the woman with the scandalous past, but as Samuel Pierce's wife, a skilled seamstress who did beautiful work and a kind woman who helped her neighbors. Marcus Thornhill faded from their thoughts, becoming nothing more than an unpleasant memory. They heard later that year that he had left Virginia City under mysterious circumstances, something about financial improprieties. Zelda felt nothing when she heard the news, neither satisfaction nor sympathy. He had become irrelevant to her life. In November of 1878, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She told Samuel one evening after dinner, watching his face transform with wonder and joy. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then immediately set her down carefully as though she might break. "I am not made of glass," she said, laughing at his suddenly protective expression. "You are carrying something precious," he said, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child. Zelda, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" She asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "I have never been happier in my entire life." The pregnancy was uneventful, though Zelda suffered from tiredness in the first months. Margaret fussed over her like a mother hen, making sure she rested enough and ate properly. George started building a cradle in his workshop, working on it in the evenings with quiet concentration. Samuel hovered anxiously, treating Zelda as though she might disappear if he stopped watching over her. Their son was born on a warm day in July 1879, arriving after 12 hours of labor that left Zelda exhausted but elated. Samuel was there for the birth, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. When the baby finally emerged, crying lustily, Samuel cut the cord with shaking hands and then stood transfixed as the midwife placed the baby in Zelda's arms. "He is perfect," Samuel breathed. "He is ours," Zelda said, looking down at the tiny, red-faced creature who had somehow come from their love. They named him Thomas George Pierce, after Margaret's father and Samuel's. He was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them up at night and filled their days with wonder. Watching Samuel with their son, seeing the gentleness in his hands as he changed diapers and the awe in his face as he rocked Thomas to sleep, Zelda fell in love with her husband all over again. The years that followed were full of the ordinary magic of family life. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic toddler who followed his father everywhere and loved to help with the horses. In 1881, Zelda gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Margaret, a sweet-natured baby with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. 2 years later came another son, James Samuel, who arrived so quickly that Samuel barely had time to fetch the midwife. The cottage became too small for their growing family, so Samuel and his father built an addition, creating a proper house with multiple bedrooms and a large kitchen. Zelda filled it with warmth and love, cooking meals that brought everyone together, sewing clothes and curtains and quilts, creating a home that was everything she had dreamed of during those desperate months when she had been running from Marcus Thornhill's lies. Sometimes, usually in quiet moments, she thought about how different her life might have been if she had never met Marcus, or if she had said yes to his proposal, or if Samuel had not been standing by that fence on the day she had walked up looking for work. But she could never regret the path that had led her here. Even the pain had been worth it, because it had brought her to this place, this family, this love. Margaret and George aged gracefully, watching their grandchildren grow with satisfaction and joy. George taught Thomas how to rope cattle, and Margaret taught Rose how to bake bread. They were doting grandparents who spoiled the children just enough without undermining Samuel and Zelda's parenting. The ranch continued to thrive. Samuel expanded the operation, buying more land, improving the breeding stock. He was a respected figure in the community now, known for his fair dealings and his skill with horses. Zelda also earned her own reputation, taking on sewing commissions from women all over the county. Her needlework was exquisite, and she charged fair prices while still contributing significantly to the family income. In 1885, when Thomas was 6, Rose was 4, and James was 2, Zelda gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel and Grace. The delivery was difficult, and the doctor warned them that Zelda should not have any more children. Samuel, who had been terrified throughout the labor, readily agreed. 5 children were a blessing they had never expected, and he would not risk Zelda's life for more. Life settled into the comfortable rhythm of a large, happy family. The children grew, went to school in Leavenworth, helped with ranch chores appropriate to their ages. Thomas showed signs of becoming a talented horseman like his father. Rose had inherited her mother's skill with a needle. James was fascinated by books and learning. Daniel and Grace were still young enough to spend most of their time playing and getting into the kind of innocent mischief that kept their parents perpetually on their toes. Samuel and Zelda grew older together, silver beginning to thread through their hair, lines appearing around their eyes, but the love between them only deepened with time. They still shared the bedroom they had created in the expanded house, still reached for each other in the night, still made each other laugh over breakfast. They had built something real and lasting, a partnership that had weathered hardship and emerged stronger. Margaret Pierce passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1887, at the age of 64. It was a loss that shook the family, but they took comfort in knowing she had lived to see her grandchildren grow, had been surrounded by love until the end. George followed her 2 years later, succumbing to pneumonia during a hard winter. He died in the house he had built, surrounded by his son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren. Samuel inherited the ranch fully then, though it had been effectively his for years. He ran it with the same fairness and skill his father had taught him, and with Zelda by his side, he expanded it into one of the most successful ranches in the county. The children grew into young adults. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property in 1893, bringing his bride back to the Pierce Ranch, where Samuel built them a house of their own on the property. Rose married a lawyer in Leavenworth, a good man who treated her with respect and affection. James went to university, the first Pierce to do so, studying agriculture and then returning to help modernize the ranch's practices. Daniel showed an aptitude for business and began managing the ranch's accounts and dealings. Grace, the youngest daughter, became a teacher, working at the school in Leavenworth. By 1895, Samuel and Zelda were in their early 40s, grandparents themselves, as Thomas and his wife had 2 children of their own. They looked at the life they had built with satisfaction and gratitude. The ranch was prosperous. Their children were happy and settled. Their love had endured. On a warm evening in June of that year, they sat together on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the Kansas plains. The air was full of the sound of cicadas and the distant lowing of cattle. Samuel held Zelda's hand, their fingers intertwined in the easy way of long familiarity. "You remember the day we met?" Samuel asked. "Of course. I was standing by a fence, reading a notice for a job that had already been filled, thinking I had nowhere left to go. And I took one look at you and thought, that woman needs help and I need to be the one to help her." Zelda smiled. "You said your words did not reach here. Marcus's words, I mean." "I was right, was not I? You were. His lies reached here, but they did not matter, not in any real way. Not when it counted." Samuel lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You know what I think? I think lies only have power when people choose to believe them without question. But when people demand proof, when they judge others by their actions instead of rumors, lies lose their strength." "That is a wise observation from a simple cowboy," Zelda teased. "Simple cowboy. I am a successful rancher with a beautiful wife, 5 accomplished children, and 2 adorable grandchildren. I am many things, but simple is not one of them." Zelda laughed, that full, free laugh she had learned again in this place with this man. "You are right. You are extraordinary." "We are extraordinary," Samuel corrected. "We built this together, Zelda. Everything we have, everything we are, we did it as partners." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Somewhere in the house behind them, They could hear Grace practicing piano, the notes drifting out through the open windows. In the distance, they could see Thomas riding back from checking the north pasture. "If I could go back and change anything," Zelda said quietly, "I would not. Even the hard parts, even Marcus and the running and the fear, because it all led me here to you, to this life. I would go through it all again if I knew this was where I would end up." Samuel pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Zelda Pierce. I have loved you since the day I saw you standing by that fence, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too, Samuel. Thank you for being brave enough to believe in me when no one else would." "That was not bravery. That was just good sense. You were worth believing in." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out. Two people who had found each other in the midst of hardship and built something beautiful from the wreckage of one man's vindictiveness. Marcus Thornhill had tried to destroy Zelda with his lies, but in the end, he had only driven her to exactly where she needed to be. His words had reached across miles and years, but they had not reached the place that mattered most. The hearts of the people who actually knew her, who judged her by her character rather than rumor. In the end, truth had won. Love had won. And Zelda and Samuel lived the rest of their days surrounded by family, prosperity, and the kind of deep contentment that comes from building a life with someone who truly sees you and loves you anyway. Their grandchildren would grow up hearing the story of how their grandparents met, how a rejected man had tried to ruin their grandmother's name in every town, and how their grandfather had said, "His words do not reach here," and meant it with everything he was. It became a family legend, a reminder that lies might travel far, but truth and love travel farther. That reputation is built on actions, not gossip. That sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things that ever could have happened. Years later, when Thomas was running the ranch with his younger brothers helping, when all 5 of Samuel and Zelda's children had children of their own, when the Pierce Ranch had become one of the most respected properties in Kansas, Samuel and Zelda would sit on that same porch and marvel at what they had created together. They grew old in the best possible way, surrounded by love and family, their bodies aging but their connection remaining strong. Samuel's hands became gnarled with arthritis, but they still reached for Zelda's every morning. Zelda's dark hair turned silver, but Samuel still told her she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. On a spring morning in 1910, Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 56, his heart simply giving out after a full life well lived. Zelda held his hand as he slipped away, whispering all the ways he had changed her life, all the love she felt, all the gratitude for the years they had shared. His last words were, "I would do it all again, every moment, just to end up here with you." Zelda lived another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, passing her days teaching the younger generation how to sew and telling stories of the old days. She spoke often of Samuel, keeping his memory alive, making sure every grandchild knew what kind of man their grandfather had been. When she passed in 1918 at the age of 63, she was buried next to Samuel in the cemetery overlooking the Missouri River. Their children erected a simple but elegant headstone that read, "Samuel and Zelda Pierce. They built a life on truth and love, and it was enough." The Pierce Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, growing and changing with the times but always remembered as the place where a rejected woman found safety and a lonely cowboy found love. The story of how they met, how Marcus Thornhill had tried to destroy Zelda, and how Samuel had stood up to lies with simple truth, became part of the ranch's history, told and retold until it became legend. And in that legend, in that true story of love conquering vindictiveness, of partnership overcoming hardship, there was a lesson that echoed down through the years. That words might travel far, but they only have power if we give it to them. That the opinion of one bitter man means nothing compared to the judgment of those who know you truly. That sometimes the worst rejection leads to the best acceptance. That home is not a place, but a person who chooses to believe in you when the world is full of lies. Marcus Thornhill had tried to ruin Zelda Nolan's name in every town, but Samuel Pierce had said, "His words do not reach here," and he had meant it in every way that mattered. Not because the words did not physically arrive, but because he chose not to give them weight. He chose to judge Zelda by her character, not by rumor. He chose love over gossip, truth over lies, and in doing so, he gave her not just a home, but a future. And that future, built on such a foundation, had been more beautiful than either of them could have imagined on that day. They met by a fence post, when she had nowhere left to run, and he had offered her somewhere to stay. They had taken that moment and turned it into a lifetime, and that lifetime had rippled outward through children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of whom carried the story of how love and truth had triumphed over lies. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the generations. And long after Samuel and Zelda were gone, long after the last person who had known them personally had passed away, the story remained, a testament to the power of choosing to believe in someone, of standing up against lies, of building something real and lasting in a world that often seems determined to tear things down. The Pierce Ranch still stood, still prosperous, still home to descendants of that cowboy who had said, "His words do not reach here," and meant it with every fiber of his being. And somewhere, in the wind that blew across the Kansas plains, in the sunset that painted the sky gold and pink, in the solid earth that had supported generations of Pierce family members, the love of Samuel and Zelda lived on, eternal and unbreakable. A love that had started with rejection and lies, but had transformed into something beautiful and true, something that no amount of vindictiveness could ever truly touch. Because in the end, love always wins, truth always matters, and the words of one bitter man, no matter how far they travel, cannot destroy what is built on solid ground.